She was 20 years old and had been living in her car since the first week of September. No family who could help. No plan beyond the next morning. Just a sleeping bag. Her grandmother's hand compass that still worked. And $10 she had been keeping folded in the compass case since the day she understood that keeping something separate from your wallet is the only way to make sure you always have something left. And with that $10, she bought an abandoned ranger station at the edge of a national forest in western Montana, the porch roof buckled on one side, the windows sealed with plywood that had gone gray and soft at the corners. The woman from the county surplus office said the building had been sitting empty for 19 years, and that the previous owner, whoever had locked the interior door and walked away in 1987, had never come back for the key. But what nobody told Wren Calloway, what nobody left alive could have told her, because the only person who knew was gone, was that inside that locked room was the reason the station had been built in the first place. A reason that reached back 60 years, and that a man named Elias Foss had spent the last years of his life making sure the right person would someday find. If stories like this one stay with you, I hope you'll subscribe before we go any further. It doesn't cost anything. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? Your city, your state, wherever you are. I read every single one. Wren Calloway had not always been the person sleeping in her car in western Montana in September. She had been, until 8 months before, a person with a bedroom and a kitchen table and a grandmother named Dot, who made coffee strong enough to stain the mug and kept a wall calendar in the kitchen with everyone's birthday written in red, and called Wren every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, reliably, without exception, for as long as Wren could remember. That was the first thing to know about Wren. Dot was the first thing to know. Dorothy Calloway, Dot to everyone who knew her, had raised Wren from the time Wren was 4 years old, after Wren's mother, Dot's daughter, had made a series of decisions that were not recoverable, and had eventually moved somewhere that was not findable, and had not been heard from since. Wren did not remember this as a loss, exactly, because she had been too young to fully understand what she was losing, and because what she had in its place was Dot, which turned out to be more than enough. Dot lived in a small house in Billings, Montana, a yellow house with a deep front porch, and a garden that was more ambitious than successful, and a kitchen that smelled, on every morning Wren could remember, of coffee and something baking, because Dot believed in the moral importance of something baking in the morning. She had been a Forest Service technician for 31 years, retiring at 62 with a pension that was modest but sufficient, and a depth of knowledge about the forest ecosystems of western Montana that she carried the way other people carry photographs, not as display, but as something always with her, always available when needed. She knew the names of every native plant within 100 miles of Billings. She knew which slopes avalanched in which conditions and how to read the difference between a healthy stand of lodgepole and one that had been compromised by beetle kill. She could navigate by stars and by terrain feature alone, and she had taught Wren to do the same starting when Wren was 7. The two of them going out in the evenings in the summer with a lantern and a compass, and Dot explaining what each bearing meant, and how the land told you where you were if you paid the right kind of attention. The compass in the case was Dot's. She had given it to Wren when Wren turned 18, the year Dot's heart had begun to make itself known in ways that were harder to ignore. Not dramatically. Dot was not a dramatic person, but consistently, a series of small warnings that Dot acknowledged the way she acknowledged most inconvenient facts, directly, without fuss, and with a plan. The plan included getting her affairs in order, making sure Wren knew where things were, and continuing to call every Sunday at 7 until she couldn't. She called on a Sunday in January. She did not call the following Sunday. Wren drove to the yellow house and found her in the kitchen chair with her coffee mug in her hand, which was the way Dot would have chosen to go if she had been given the choice, which in some sense she had been. She had known it was coming, and she had kept making her coffee until she couldn't anymore. Wren was 19. She stayed in the yellow house through the spring, paying the rent with a combination of a small survivor's benefit and what she earned from 2 part-time jobs. One at a garden center, where she had worked since she was 16, and one at a copy shop that was open until midnight and paid 50 cents more per hour because of it. She was managing. She was also doing the thing that people do when they are managing a grief they have not yet fully entered, which is to organize around the outside of it and keep moving and not look directly at the center of it. Because looking directly at the center of it while you are also trying to pay rent requires a kind of energy that managing people do not have. The thing that destabilized the managing was a person named Gerald Vance. Gerald Vance was Dot's landlord. He was 54, owned several rental properties in Billings, and operated with the particular confidence of a person who has learned that the law generally moves slowly enough that impatience is a useful business tool. Dot had rented the yellow house from him for 11 years, on a month-to-month lease she had been comfortable with because she was Dot, and Dot made things work. When Dot died, Gerald Vance waited 6 weeks. Exactly 6 weeks, Wren would later calculate, and then sent a letter. The letter said that because the named tenant was deceased, the lease was terminated, and that the property would need to be vacated within 30 days. There was a number to call if Wren had questions. She called it. Gerald Vance answered with the practiced neutrality of a person who has had this conversation before and has decided in advance how it ends. He said he was sorry for her loss. He said the 30 days was actually generous given the circumstances. He said if there was anything remaining in the property after that date, it would need to be handled by his office. Wren said she understood. She said it with the particular flatness of a person who is not agreeing but is recognizing that agreement and disagreement are both, in this specific moment, beside the point. She sorted through Dot's things with a care that took most of the 30 days. She kept the compass. She kept the wall calendar, the one with the birthdays in red, including Wren's own birthday written in Dot's handwriting in a circle of red ink like a small sun. She kept 3 of Dot's books, field guides, the kind with Dot's own penciled notes in the margins, dates and locations, and small observations that had not been printed in any edition. She kept the coffee mug. She left everything else because she had a car and not a truck and had to choose. She drove west without a specific plan, which at 20 and newly without a home is not unusual and not even necessarily wrong. It is sometimes simply the only direction available. She slept in rest areas and, when she was tired enough not to care about the cold, in pull-offs along the forest roads west of Missoula. And she told herself every morning that this was not permanent, and every evening was less certain of that than she had been in the morning. The county surplus notice was tacked to a corkboard inside a gas station in a small town called Keswick, just west of where the National Forest Boundary Road turned to gravel. It was handwritten on a sheet of yellow legal paper, which she would not have expected from a county surplus office, and which she later understood was because the woman who ran the office had written it herself rather than wait for the county to print something. Because she had been trying to move this particular property for 3 years and had run out of patience with official processes. Surplus property auction, historic ranger station, minimum bid $10. And below that, a hand-drawn map that was better than most printed maps she had seen. She drove out the following morning. The station was at the end of a 2-track road that climbed for about a mile through second-growth pine before opening into a small clearing, and the clearing was where the building sat. Backed up against a hillside with a creek running past the south end close enough that you could hear it from the porch. The building was log construction, a main room and a half loft and a back room that was separated from the rest by a door she could see through the gap in the plywood on the east window, was not only closed, but padlocked. The porch roof had buckled on the left side, one of the support posts having rotted through at the base, so that the whole structure leaned at an angle that was alarming until you looked at the mortise joints in the remaining posts and understood that they were holding and would continue to hold for a while yet. The main roof looked sound. The log walls, in the places she could examine them, were solid, chinking cracked in some sections, but the logs themselves tight and dry. She walked the perimeter twice. She put both hands on the wall and pressed. The logs pushed back. She thought about Dot. She thought about Dot standing at the kitchen calendar circling birthdays. She thought about what Dot would have said about this building, and what Dot would have said after walking the perimeter and putting her hands on the logs was, "The bones are good." She drove to the county surplus office. The woman running the auction was named Marge Pettiford, and she was in her early 60s, broad-shouldered and brisk, with the no-nonsense manner of someone who has been moving county property for decades and has long since stopped being surprised by what people buy or why. She looked at Wren across the folding table she was using as a desk and said, "You're bidding on the ranger station." "I am," Wren said. Marge looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the form she was holding. "It's got a locked interior room," Marge said. "County doesn't have a key. Whatever's in there is in there." "I understand." There were 3 other bids, one from a salvage company, one from a developer, one from a man who wanted the land for an outfitter operation. She set the form down. They all withdrew when they learned about the locked room. Said it was a liability. "I'll take that liability," Wren said. Marge looked at her for another moment, not an evaluating look exactly, more the look of someone who has been doing a job for a long time and occasionally recognizes something in it that surprises them. She took Wren's $10 bill and wrote the receipt. "There's a man named Roy Elkin," Marge said, as Wren folded the receipt. "He lives about 4 miles east of the station, off the Forest Service Road. He was the last active ranger at that station before it closed. He's 81 now. You should talk to him." Wren asked if he would want to be talked to. Marge said, "He's been waiting for someone to ask." She slept in her car in the clearing that first night. The creek audible and the pines close on 3 sides, and the station dark behind her. And she lay looking at the sky through the windshield and thought about the locked room, and about Dot, and about the compass in the case, and about the fact that she owned a building for the first time in her life, which was either the most sensible thing she had done in recent months or the least sensible, and she was not sure yet which. In the morning she went to find Roy Elkin. He lived in a log house not unlike the station, set back from the forest road behind a stand of aspen that had gone gold in the September morning. He answered the door in a flannel shirt and suspenders before she had finished knocking, as if he had heard her coming up the track and had been on his way to the door already. He was smaller than she expected from a man described as a ranger, compact and very still, with eyes that were the particular clear gray blue of high-altitude sky and that had in them the quality of someone who has spent a lifetime looking at distances. "You bought the Foss station," he said. "I did," she said. "You know about it? I've been watching that property since 1987, he said. "Come in." He poured coffee without asking. Strong, in the same style as Dot's. And Wren held the mug and felt something loosen slightly in her chest that she had not known was tight. They sat at his kitchen table, and Roy Elkin talked about the ranger station and about a man named Elias Foss, and Wren listened without interrupting for the better part of 2 hours. And by the time she left, she understood things about the building she owned, that changed the shape of everything. Elias Foss had been the first ranger assigned to that station when it was built in 1931. A young man, 26 years old, from a family that had been in western Montana since before there was a state to be in. He had served at that station for 31 years, until his retirement in 1962, and during those 3 decades he had done what good rangers do. He had mapped and monitored and maintained and noted and protected. And he had done it with a consistency and a precision that his successors, Roy Elkin among them, had found in the records and had understood to be the work of someone who took the long view. He cared about the land the way some people care about their children, Roy said. Not possessively. Protectively, he wanted it to be there for people who came after. He thought about who comes after. After Elias retired in 1962, he had continued to come to the station as a volunteer, helping with surveys and with training new rangers until his eyesight and his knees made the terrain too difficult to manage. He had died in 1988 at the age of 83, 1 year after the station was decommissioned and locked. He locked that room himself, Roy said, the spring before he died. I was there. He didn't say what was in it, and I didn't ask, because when Elias Foss decided something was nobody else's business yet, it was nobody else's business yet. He paused. He looked at his coffee. He said the station would find the right person in time. I didn't know what that meant then. Another pause. I'm starting to think I do now. If you're still here, good. I'm glad. What Ren found in that locked room is the part of this story I have been turning over since I first heard it, and we are almost there. If you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you will before we go any further, and if someone you know needs to hear something like this today, please share it before you keep reading. She spent the first week doing the work the building needed most urgently, which was also the work she needed most urgently, because the two of them, Ren and the ranger station, were in approximately the same condition, structurally sound but badly in need of attention. She replaced the rotted post on the porch, which turned out to be a simpler repair than the buckled roof had made it look. 1 post, 1 afternoon, the porch level again. She reseated the chinking in the sections of the south and east walls where it had cracked and pulled away, working slowly and carefully the way Dot had always worked on things that required patience. She cleared the drainage channel along the north side that had been blocked for what looked like years, and was the reason the base log on that wall had begun to show soft spots. Roy Elkin came by on the 3rd day with a truck full of tools and the information that he had been keeping an eye on the building's maintenance needs for 2 decades and had a pretty specific list. He was 81 and moved like someone a decade younger, and he had opinions about the correct way to do most things, and was usually right about them, and said so without apology, which was a quality Ren recognized and was comfortable with. He also had a key. Not the padlock key. A key that Roy had found in the station's original maintenance log in 1987 when he was helping inventory the building before it was decommissioned. A key labeled in Elias Foss's handwriting simply, "Cabinet." He had kept it because nobody had told him not to, and because Elias had told him the station would find the right person, and he had understood this to mean that someone would eventually need what was in that room, and that when they came, they should be able to get in. He handed it to Ren on the 4th morning when they were sitting on the repaired porch with coffee, as if he had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it. "I've been carrying that for 37 years, he said. She looked at the key in her hand. It was a small flat key, the kind that fits a wooden cabinet or a lockbox, worn smooth where someone had handled it often. "Do you know what it opens?" she asked. "I know what room it opens," he said. "I think it opens something inside the room too. But that part," he picked up his coffee, "I've always figured wasn't mine to know." The padlock on the interior door was heavy and old, and had been painted over at some point, and the paint had sealed the keyhole. She worked at it for 20 minutes with a wire and a flashlight before the keyhole was clear enough for the key to go in, and when it did, the lock opened on the first turn. She pushed the door open. The room was not large, perhaps 12 by 14 feet, with a single north-facing window that had been boarded from the inside rather than the outside, so that the light in the room, when she pried the board back, was the soft, indirect gray of a cloudy morning in the mountains. It smelled of pine and paper, and the particular dryness of a space that has been sealed from moisture for a long time. Along the east wall was a wooden cabinet, floor to ceiling, built into the wall and fitted with a series of flat, shallow drawers, the kind used for maps. Each drawer was labeled in Elias Foss's handwriting, neat and small, North Quadrant, 1935-1942. Fire History, 1931-1960. Watershed Survey, 1948-1955. Species Record, 1931-1962. There were 14 drawers in total. She opened the top drawer. Inside, flat and carefully preserved between sheets of waxed paper, were survey maps. Hand-drawn, the lines precise and fine, covering every drainage and ridgeline and trail and meadow of the forest quadrant that surrounded the station. Not copies of official maps, original surveys. Elias Foss's own, drawn from his own observations over 31 years, with notations in a hand so small and careful she had to bend close to read them. Wolf tracks observed. March 1938. Old growth stand, unlogged, 1931. Still intact, 1961. Spring rises here in drought years. She opened the second drawer. The fire history. 42 individual hand-drawn maps of fire events, each annotated with date and extent and observed recovery rate, going back to the station's first year and forward to 1960. The species record drawer held something she had not expected, not maps but notebooks, 11 of them, the same dimensions as the drawers, each one filled from cover to cover in Elias Foss's handwriting. Daily observations, 31 years of them. Every notable wildlife sighting, every unusual plant, every change in the watershed, every sign of what was thriving and what was struggling and what had come back after it was thought to be gone. She stood in the room for a long time after she had opened the last drawer. She thought about Dot. She thought about Dot's field guides with the penciled notes in the margins, dates and locations, small, careful observations that were not in any printed edition. She thought about the compass in its case, and about what it meant that she was standing in a room full of 60 years of a person paying the right kind of attention to the land, and that she was 20 years old with nowhere to go, and that she had just paid $10 for all of it. She went out and sat on the porch and looked at the clearing and the pines and the creek. Roy Elkin was still there, sitting in the camp chair he had brought the previous day and left because he had clearly decided to keep coming back. He looked at her face when she came out and read something in it that made him set his coffee down. He knew, Wren said. It was not a question. He knew, Roy said. He knew what it was. He knew it mattered. He knew it was the kind of thing that only matters to the right person, Roy said. And he was patient enough to wait. She called the Forest Service District office in Missoula the following week. She talked to a woman named Sandra Okafor, the district ecologist, who drove out to the station 2 days later and stood in the map room for 45 minutes without saying much of anything, and then turned around with the expression of a person who has just been handed something they did not know was possible. "Do you understand what this is?" Sandra said. "Tell me what it is," Wren said. Sandra told her. The fire history alone, 42 documented fire events with hand-drawn perimeter maps and recovery observations, covered a period and a geographic area that had no other systematic record in the district's archives. The species notebooks contained the only known pre-1960 observations of at least 3 plant communities that the service had been trying to establish baseline data for in order to understand their post-fire recovery patterns. The watershed surveys predated any federal survey of the area by nearly 20 years. "This is a primary source," Sandra said. "These are primary sources." "For all of it." "What does that mean?" Wren asked. "Practically." Sandra looked at the drawers. She looked at Wren. "It means there are people who will want to work with this. University researchers, preservation ecologists, people who have been trying to understand these systems without the baseline data to do it." She paused. "It means this station has scientific value, real value. The kind that could support a partnership, a restoration grant, potentially a research residency program. People who would come here and work with the records, with the land." She looked at Wren, "With whoever is managing the property." Wren looked at the room. She looked at the 14 flat drawers. She looked at the 11 notebooks in Elias Foss's small, careful hand, 31 years of a person paying attention. "He wanted someone to use it," Wren said. "That's what it looks like," Sandra said. "It took 14 months for the partnership to come together. 14 months of phone calls and applications and 2 grant proposals that Sandra Okafor helped Wren write, and one that they had to rewrite twice and submit to a different foundation before it was accepted. Roy Elkin came by 3 mornings a week during those months, not always to work on the building, and sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk about Elias, and about the land, and about what Elias had been like in his last years, when he knew he was running out of time and had become even more deliberate than usual. "He used to say that the land keeps the record whether we write it down or not," Roy said one morning, when the aspens along the creek had gone gold again and the second autumn at the station was arriving the way the first one had, clear and cold and full of the specific smell of pine warming in the afternoon. But he also said that writing it down is how we prove we were paying attention, that it matters to say, "I was here, and I noticed." "My grandmother said something like that," Wren said. Roy looked at her. "She kept notes in her field guides," Wren said, "every time she went out. Dates and what she saw and what it meant. She was quiet for a moment. She never published them. They were just for her." "They weren't just for her," Roy said. "She gave them to you." Wren thought about that for a long time. Elias Foss had done one other thing she discovered in the second year, that Roy mentioned the way he mentioned most important things, as a piece of information, plainly, without emphasis, as if it were simply a fact, and not the thing that would matter most. Every spring, from the year he retired until the year before he died, Elias had hiked the ridgeline above the station. 4 miles out and 4 miles back, a route he had walked every year for 60 years, and had left a small cairn at the highest point, not as a trail marker, but as a record of the season, a way of saying, "I came here again." The conditions, the snowpack, what was blooming. He had done it every year until he was 82, and his knees would not permit the climb. Wren hiked the ridgeline in the 3rd April. She took the compass and the field guide, and a notebook of her own. The cairns Elias had left were still there. Not one cairn, but decades of them, each year's stones placed alongside the last until they had become something larger than a marker, a record written in stone that the mountain had held. She sat at the top for a long time, looking at the forest laid out below her, and she wrote in her notebook the things she observed. The snowpack, the early flowers at the tree line, the direction of the wind, a pair of ravens working a thermal to the north. She wrote the date. She wrote, "Conditions good. Returning next year." She came down and built her own small cairn beside Elias's last one. Roy called that evening and she told him what she had done. He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. That was all. Just good. Gerald Vance did not feature in what happened next in any direct way, which was the best possible outcome. He had moved his tenant along and had gotten what he wanted, which was the yellow house back for another tenant at a higher rent. And the world had neither rewarded him specifically for this, nor punished him specifically for it. He simply existed somewhere in Billings, probably in an office, probably with a phone he answered with practiced neutrality. And Wren was 4 hours west in a ranger station she had bought for $10, and the distance between those two facts was its own kind of verdict. She did not spend much time thinking about him. She had other things to think about. The research residency at the station began in the 3rd year, when the partnership with the Forest Service and a university ecology program in Missoula brought the first 2 graduate students to spend a summer working with the Foss records and conducting new surveys using the old ones as baselines. They were young. One was 24, one was 26. And they came with laptops and high-precision GPS units and the specific hunger of people who have been looking for primary data and had not expected to find it in a hand-drawn cabinet in a log building at the end of a 2-track road. They ate dinner on the porch most evenings. They asked Wren questions about the land that she often knew the answer to, from Roy's telling and from her own 2 years of walking it, and sometimes questions she did not know and had to say she didn't know, which she found she was comfortable with. Sandra Okafor came up twice that summer and stood on the ridgeline with a topographic printout of Elias's 1948 watershed survey in one hand and her own GPS unit in the other, comparing what he had drawn to what was still there and what had changed. And she said once, looking at a spring he had marked reliable in drought years, which was still running in a dry August, he was right about everything. It was one of the graduate students, the 26-year-old, a serious young woman named Petra, who wore the same hat every day and took field notes with a fountain pen, who found the last thing Elias had left in the cabinet. It was in the final drawer, the one labeled personal, which Wren had opened on the first day and found empty and had assumed was simply a drawer he had not gotten to. Petra, doing a systematic inventory of the cabinet for her research log, had pulled the drawer all the way out and found, taped to the back panel, a single index card. It was in Elias Foss's handwriting. It said, "If you have read the notebooks, you already understand what the land requires. Pay attention. Write it down. Come back next year. E. Foss." April 1987. Wren read the card and stood in the map room for a while. Then she took it to the kitchen and pinned it above the window that faced the clearing and the creek, where she would see it every morning. Some things are built to outlast the person who built them. Not by accident. Nothing important outlasts by accident, but by intention. By the specific work of someone who understood that what they were making was not for themselves, but for whoever came after, and was paying the right kind of attention. Elias Foss had spent 60 years paying that kind of attention to a piece of land in western Montana, and he had locked the record of it in a room, and trusted that the world would eventually send someone who deserved to find it. A 20-year-old with $10 and a grandmother's compass and nowhere to go had walked into an auction and put up her hand, and the door had opened, and 60 years of careful watching had found the one person who knew what to do with it. She was 20, broke, living in her car, with a compass and $10 kept folded in the case. She bought an old ranger station nobody else wanted. What was locked inside didn't just change everything she had. It handed her 60 years of someone else's paying attention, and asked her, without words, to add her own. If this story gave you something today, I hope you'll subscribe and share it with someone who needs it. And I have one question before you go. Has there ever been a person in your life, maybe someone gone now, whose way of paying attention to the world taught you how to pay attention too? Tell me about them in the comments. I would love to read every answer. See you in the next one.